Have you ever told a story to your kids or maybe even your grandkids about back when you were a boy and you had to travel 5 miles uphill in a snowstorm each way just to get to school? Or maybe you told them stories about horror stories, really, about having to answer the telephone without caller ID. Those are the kinds of things that make for a colorful life and a great relationship with those that follow behind us. Hi, I'm Bill Hennessy, and I help Christians in their retirement navigate the chaos, change, and confusion of their new season so that they can experience more freedom, fulfillment, and friendship. And today on the Finding Meaning and Purpose podcast, I want to just talk about legacy. You know, leaving a legacy is such an important thing for us. I think that we need to realize that we are now the older generation, and the stories that we tell are going to be as important to those who follow after us as the stories of our predecessors are to us. And I can remember having a conversation with my wife's father, John Shank. And John was older when Marie was born, and so he had already lived a full life by the time that Marie and I got married. In fact, he was just a little bit younger than I am now when the two of us tied the knot. And I used to hear stories from Dad that he would talk about things that happened to him as a boy, or he would talk about things that happened to him in World War II, or he would talk about things that happened to him on the oil rigs or later on working for Boeing aircraft and finally on the space shuttle. And every time he'd tell those stories, I'd say to him, Dad, we need to do something about recording these to capture those for future generations. And he would always just shrug it off and say, nobody wants to hear my stories. That was so untrue. I loved his stories. And my kids loved his stories. And as they grew older, they learned to appreciate even more all the change that he had been through in his lifetime. Well, the same holds true for you and I. We are living in a time when the world has changed dramatically in our lifetime. I can remember going to high school and learning to type on a manual typewriter and hoping that I could get to the front two rows where the electric typewriters were, just so that I could learn how to type on an electric typewriter. I can remember the things that it was like learning to drive. How many kids today know how to drive a stick shift? And yet, manual transmissions were a thing that we dealt with all the time. How about that button on the floor in your car that turned the lights on from low to high beam? Yeah, those are things that our kids and our grandkids can't relate to, that we've seen change. We were there when the computers became something that you brought home instead of in the business place. They went from being massive structures that took up whole floors of office buildings to microcomputers and cell phones that have incredible memory and capacity. Well, those are stories that we can tell. Now, obviously, we don't want to just talk about tech. We want to talk about the things that happen to us along the way. So it's a matter of picking up your cell phone. It's a matter of talking into that cell phone and saying to the phone the things that you had happened to you as a child or as a young adult. I can remember telling stories to my kids about God's provision in our lives when we were pastoring in Priest River, Idaho. And my first son, Thomas, was about to be born. My daughter, Rachel, was 5 years old at the time, and we got Marie to the hospital in a very unique way. And I want to tell that story to you just so that you can kind of get a glimpse into the power of storytelling and why it would mean something to your kids or your grandkids or even your great grandkids. So let me start by giving you a little bit of background. Back in the day, when I was pastoring in Priest River, Idaho, I was an EMT, an emergency medical technician. This is in the days before 911. You actually had to call an ambulance number, and then that number rang into a radio system, and we picked up a pager, and the pager would give us the information over the air about the person that needed our help. And so we'd jump in the ambulance, and but that meant we had to get down to the ambulance first of all. And so we'd travel down to the ambulance station. We'd meet together there, stage everything, get ready to go. And when the last EMT arrived, we'd roll out the gates down a gravel road out onto the main street and head out to wherever it was in a 50-mile square radius. It was a large area for an EMT to cover, but we were the only hope people had. So we were the best they had to offer. Well, on the day that Marie was going to be born or give birth to Thomas. It was kind of a bad day. I mean, it had snowed 12 inches in Priest River, and it was December 2nd, and we were looking at all these things that we were going to have to face in terms of facing labor and traveling an hour into Spokane on good roads. So probably with 12 inches of snow on the road, it was going to take a good 2 hours to get to the hospital. And so when Marie began to have labor pains, and she knew that it was time for us to start calling the ambulance to get to the hospital in Spokane, here's what happened. It was so funny. We lived in a 12 by 60 mobile home in the day. And the first person to arrive was the city sergeant. And then all of a sudden, the county sheriff came by, and we had the first responders from the fire department there, and we had the city police there, and we had the state patrol there, and everybody's pulling in along the front of our property. It wasn't a very wide piece of property. It was probably only 50 feet wide and 100 feet deep. And there was almost no place for the ambulance to come when it or park when it came. And so we had to have people move their vehicles away to have the ambulance be able to back up into the driveway to be able to pick Marie up. Well, there were so many people in our living room that there was no room for the gurney in order to get her onto the gurney to take her to the hospital in Spokane. And so she literally walked out to the ambulance, and then we got her into the gurney then. And I was riding in the back because in the day, if you delivered a baby in the back of an ambulance as an EMT, you got to wear a stork pin on your collar. And I wanted that stork pin so badly. And everybody was there, and we had so many people, we couldn't hardly get into the ambulance. But finally, we got rolling. And when we got just over to the border into Washington State, in Newport, Washington, I looked at the ambulance driver and I said, "Hey, Les, let's pull over for a second." He said, "Why?" I said, "I want to get some Diet Pepsi." And so I ran into the store and picked up a 6-pack of Diet Pepsi. I wanted to do everything I could to delay that ambulance from getting Spokane so that I had a good chance of being in the catcher's position and taking the opportunity to give birth or take part in my wife giving birth to our son Thomas. Well, the further along we went, about 30 miles an hour is all we could get up steam to do in the snow. Four-wheel drive ambulance, but it just wasn't cutting it. So we ended up taking longer and longer to go. But as far as it was just the craziest thing. The further along we went towards Spokane, the further apart the contractions got. And so finally we got to Sacred Heart Hospital. And we were on our way up to the 9th floor, and the contractions had all but stopped. But because of the weather and because of the distance that we had traveled, they decided to wait and see at the maternity ward what was going on. Well, as we were checking in, there was this nurse and then a nun that was doing the check-in for us, and they were doing this thing, and I was kind of frustrated that I didn't get my stork pin. I was at the hospital. I wasn't going to be able to do the same thing. But delivered in the hospital, it would be a great experience, but no pin on the shoulder. So anyway, I was surprised when they started asking questions. I don't know why it was, but anyway, the nurse nun began to ask all the demographic questions. And finally, I looked over at Marie and I said, "Honey, if this works out, I really think we ought to get married." Well, I was a pastor, and the ambulance driver said, "No, Marie." And his wife, who was also an EMT, she kicked me in the leg, and Marie just gave me the death glare. And all of us started laughing, and the nun didn't see the humor in that at all. Of course, I'd been married for many years by that time. Well, it was a great day, a great night, but it stretched into an overnight. And it was a long, long day. Finally, the next day, Marie gave birth to Thomas, and I went home to Priest River because my mom had been watching our older daughter, Rachel. And we went back into town. And as I was leaving the hospital, Marie looked at me and said, "Now, here's what we need to buy at the grocery store." And I took the list dutifully, and I walked out of the hospital room. And Rachel, who was with me at this point, said, "Daddy, how are we going to do that? You don't have any money." I said, "Well, I know, honey, but God will provide." And so as we drove home, I said, "Let's pray." And we began to pray. And Rachel was a very earnest prayer warrior. And she began to seek God and just say, "God, we got to have this stuff for the baby. We have to have this stuff for my little brother." And we didn't know how God was going to handle it, but I had till the morning. And so we drove home and we pulled into the driveway of the mobile home, and we had a front step. And on that front step were some boxes. And Rachel says, Daddy, what's all that? I said, Rachel, I don't know. Let's go check it out. And so we hopped out of the car and we walked up to the steps, and there was this huge array of boxes and packages and things inside the boxes that it was overflowing. And we brought all that stuff inside, and everything that we needed on that list that Marie had given me for groceries was in that box. And then down at the very bottom of the box was a check for $500 from Priest Lake Community Church, a church that was up the mile or up the road 23 miles, and a church that was not of our same denomination, but their elders had a fund that they called the Deacon Fund, and they would give away money every now and again to people that they thought might need it. And they had given us a check for $500. God's provision was so plain, and it gave such a faith lesson to Rachel. She carries it with her today. And I knew that God was taking care of us. I knew that it was God who provided for us in that moment. And when we got to the hospital the next day to take Marie and Thomas home, oh, what a story Rachel had for Marie. And all of us were so surprised and so joyful over what God had done through that church up the road. I'll remember it the rest of my life because it was such a great day, and God's favor was so clearly upon us. Well, these are the stories that we can be telling our kids and our grandkids and even our great kids. But if we're not around to tell it, how will they know the story? And that's what I want to talk about the rest of the time that we're here together today. Let me just challenge you. Pick up your cell phone and start telling the stories of your life. Pick up your cell phone and start giving out a little bit of your past, your shared past with your wife or your husband or your kids, and start to tell the stories of how you found meaning and hope and purpose in your life. And I think it's going to make a huge difference in the lives of those that follow after us. It's really important. It's as simple as going into your camera on your phone and hitting the video section and turning it onto the selfie side. All right. Don't be like an old person and turn the camera around like this and have the selfie side away from you and have the other side towards you and try to take a video that way. That's just not going to work out. What you need to be able to do is to put it on the selfie side and just relax and just start telling the story into the phone. Look at the camera, tell the story into the phone. And then when you've done recording, hit stop and then put that recording either in Google Documents or into iCloud or whatever service you might use on your computer to back up your files, and let your kids and grandkids know where those are. You might even want to share it with them over a holiday meal, for example. You could tell them that, hey, I've got this thing set up for you, and there's a file folder on my Google Drive that you're going to want to know about. And in it, I tell stories. And then maybe just tell one story out of that group of people, stories that you have in that file, and let that be something that your kids and grandkids look forward to. I think it's going to make a huge difference. You know, when we get near retirement or we're in retirement, there's so much chaos, change, and confusion in that season that we need to really be intentional to find some joy and to be able to give away joy. And part of the joy that we have is telling our story. And you might say, well, nobody wants to hear my story. Nothing could be further from the truth. In fact, kids in your home and growing up, or the kids that are coming out of high school, they are more respectful of elders than American kids have been in generations. They really believe that we have something to say. They really want to know how we saw the world, and they really want to hear from us the experiences that we've had. So let me just encourage you. Your story is important and it's unique to you, and God has used your life in many different ways. And He wants you to be able to tell other people about that. Well, the first place that you ought to be doing this is to leave a legacy for your kids, your grandkids, your great grandkids, and let them know that you have lived a storied life, and let them know about the faithfulness of God along the way. Well, let me challenge you to do something today. I would like you to go to clarifyfocus.com. And on that website, which is my website, you'll find a tab that says resources. And on that, you'll find a form that will you can download. And when you download that form, it's going to give you kind of an idea, a story structure that you can use to tell stories, and a way for you to share those stories with your family. So I'd encourage you to go to clarifyfocus.com and look for the resources tab. And you're going to see a form there that allows you to construct a story that you would tell on video. And then all you have to do is use your cell phone. It doesn't matter if it's shaking. It doesn't matter if your voice isn't just perfect. It doesn't matter if your hair is not just right. Tell your story. You are important to people that you have raised as children. You're important to your grandkids. You're going to be important to your great grandkids whenever that happens in your life. And I think it's going to be very, very important for you to have told those stories and to have shared your life with the people who follow after you. It's all about legacy, and legacy gives meaning and purpose to life. Until next time, I'm Bill Hennessy. Have a great day.